Let us pray. God of all, in whose wisdom is the path of peace, through whose guidance all right decisions are made, with those who lead our nation during these challenging times, strengthen their insight into what is best for the people and give them courage to pursue the common good. That laying aside personal advantage, they may argue for a future that may bring about the flourishing of our nation and the greater peace and prosperity of our world. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. To the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is in session. I wish to acknowledge the presence of the students of the Combermere School, better known as the University of Waterford, along with their teacher, Miss Danielle Ford. I also wish to acknowledge the presence of Tejia Gorin Brewster and her mother, Miss Stacia Gorin. I hope that you all find this session productive and enthralling. I know that there are some persons who are members of this honorable chamber, when they hear the school, Combermere School, it arouses a degree of jealousy, but that is understood. That is understood because there's no better school in this country called Barbados than the Combermere School. In a minute.
Mr. Speaker, I noticed that you moved straight to notices in your enthusiasm before we look at the minutes, but sorry, beg to move that the minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, January 23rd be deferred.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are deferred.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if you have any other announcements.
No, they're not contained therein.
Messages from Her Excellency the President, petitions, papers.
Honourable member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the Barbados Water Authority Water Protection Zones Order 2023.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers.
Honourable member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, The role of identity in active citizenship is changing globally. Decades ago, countries that offered national identity documents did so with a simple paper document or card, which carried only basic identifying information. Those that bore photos allowed only a simple visual recognition process by the authorities, wherein the bearer of the ID presented it to another party, who relied on a very rudimentary scan of the document to see whether it looked legitimate, whether it bore the general color and dimensions of the state-issued document, and whether the photo it carried looked generally like the individual by whom the card was being presented. Both this process and the associated documents could offer little security, they could offer little reliability, and certainly they offered no further functionality for either the individual in possession of the card or the institution. Simple paper ID cards, such as that previously in use in Barbados, were in theory and in practice highly susceptible to manipulation and forgery. Any individual who was sufficiently motivated and in possession of a laminator could reproduce such a card, leading to early cases of identity theft long before the risk of this type of theft had become as pervasive and as sophisticated as it now is in today's online environment. So for us in Barbados, the notion of identity is also inalienably linked to rights and to access to goods and services. National identity cards have been in use in Barbados since the year 1979. Article 3 of the 2021 Charter of Barbados affirms the right and duty of every Barbadian, and I quote, to participate in the economic, political, and social life of Barbados as an expression of active citizenship, to vote and seek public office in accordance with the laws of this country. So the process in which national identity cards are issued also serves as a national registration process under the Representation of the People Act for the purpose of participation in elections. Mr. Speaker, for Barbadians, the issue of national identity and the means of identification are bound up in who we are, how we participate in all expressions of democracy, how we enjoy our rights and exercise our responsibilities, and how we participate in social and economic life and secure our well-being. A national identity document is, for us then, not just a piece of paper or plastic. If we make it so, and if we take advantage of all the opportunities, it can be far more useful and empowering and holds the potential to improve our lives and expand our choices. And just how can this be accomplished by an ID card? The past decade has revolutionized the expectations of citizens and governments of what national identity cards can deliver. And as a result, such cards have undergone a tremendous transformation. Simple paper cards that must be presented in person and can only work for single identification applications have now given way to smarter digital IDs that include a microprocessor for more robust document verification, online authentication, and signature. This new generation of computerized national identity cards offers one of the best options in identity theft protection. These digital IDs, e-IDs, where you have the use of a physical card attributes in an online environment, and mobile IDs, their use on a mobile device, also enable governments to implement online applications such as e-government solutions, giving citizens access to public services with the reassurance of more robust security than currently exists. These forms of ID enable better protection of citizens, particularly given the number of transactions we perform online and how exposed those might make us. A single card can therefore offer many applications, from enabling the user to file their taxes to giving them access to state benefits. The ID number in these cases may act as a single identifier that allows the individual to present only once to government for the purpose of the first transaction, and thereafter have their basic identifying data saved across government service institutions so that they need not complete multiple forms and submit information on multiple occasions. Sir, in business, digital ID cards enable financial services and telecom companies to fulfill Know Your Customer or KYC requirements, removing from the customer onerous conditions related to presenting multiple forms of ID and separate proof of address documentation. Sir, it is no secret that for many Barbadians, proof of address requirements in particular can discriminate against young people, non-heads of households, and other groups or individuals who may not own or rent property and do not receive correspondence in their own name. In such situations, digital IDs offer financial institutions and others a proof of address that would be verified prior by the state, and that each registered individual in possession of a card may use reliably and in lieu of a utility bill or other paper proof of address, thereby removing, sir, what is now a burden for many Barbadians. It is the provision of these benefits, together with other practical considerations, which served as the basis for a decision by the Cabinet of Barbados in February 2019, I quote, that the Barbados National Identification ID be replaced by a digital ID with more advanced technical capabilities. In order to bring effect to this decision, the Barbados Identity Management Act, or BIM Act 2021, was passed, and it was proclaimed in March 2021. This act provides for the establishment, maintenance, and regulation of a national identity management system that facilitates the enrollment and re-registration of citizens of Barbados and persons who are not citizens of Barbados but who are legally resident in Barbados for a period of 6 months or more. It provides for the compilation and maintenance of a database of such persons to be known as the National Register, for the issue of new identification cards and national identity credentials to each person registered in the National Register. It further provides for the facilitation of the verification and authentication of identity information for all persons registered in the National Register, and for the preservation, protection, security, and confidentiality of the National Identity Management System. In furtherance of this, the legislation enacted a number of provisions that I wish to revisit here today. Section 34(1) of the Act states that an identification card authorized under Section 25 of the Representation of the People Act, Cap 12, or under the Statistics Act, Cap 192, shall remain valid for a period of 12 months from the date of the commencement of this act. In other words, the old ID cards were to have expired by April 2022. But, sir, it became clear that more time was required. So in lieu of amending the act to reflect a new date at that time, a change to the deadline was made administratively only, meaning not via an amendment to the legislation. And via public announcement, the deadline was amended 3 times. On the first occasion to June 30th, 2023, then to October 31st, 2023, and then again to January 31st, 2024. The Act also sought to associate that validity with certain benefits, and so at Section 5, it stipulates that a person who is not registered under this Act shall not, among other things, qualify to be added to the Register of Electors or the revised Register of Electors prepared under the Representation of the People Act, Cap 12, shall not qualify to obtain a driver's permit or license, and shall not qualify to access any service or goods which require the presentation of an ID card to obtain such services or goods. Sir, this is the language that exists in the Act today. Now, arguably, the question of what it means to invalidate a national identity document is a fundamental one. And further, the extent to which the presence or absence of that document should affect a citizen's access to certain rights and privileges is more fundamental still. Mr. Speaker, it is these questions and the need to bring clarity to the way forward today on the eve of the announced deadline, and in consideration of the performance of the Barbados National ID project. It is these questions, sir, that bring us here today. Starting in early 2017, 82% of all countries issuing national ID cards implemented digital ID programs. Sir, I will repeat that. 82%, starting in 2017, of all countries issuing national ID cards opted to begin the implementation of digital IDs in their stead. And other countries have taken and retain to this day the mandatory approach that the BIM Act originally takes. Passed on 20th of June 2019, the 2019-1157 EU regulation, European Union regulation, gives its member states 2 years to implement ID cards with security features aligned with those of passports. Those member states, along with Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein, were required to start to issue those new cards with a secure contactless chip, with the holder's photo with 2 fingerprints, and to do so within the 2021 to 2022 time frame, as the directive came into force 12 months after its publication, and states were given 2 years to comply. All of those member states and others have continued to apply the mandatory approach. France gradually issued its new national contact and contactless electronic chip ID card from the 16th of March 2021. That is a highly secure polycarbonate card. It is free and it is valid under the laws of that country for 10 years. The Philippines, with a population of 113 million, began in 2020 with an aim to create a single national identification system with a unique ID number and an electronic card for every citizen and resident of the country. As is our own intent, the card is to allow an individual to present once to government for services and for basic identifying information to be accessible in a secure environment across various government access points like licensing authority, polyclinics, port authority, and other state agencies. State entities validating the card would be able to access only that basic identifying information, as well as only the additional information relevant to that particular transaction that is stored administratively by that institution. So this is the Philippines, with a population of 113 million. 50 million people were registered by the end of December 2021, less than half. While that country had a target of issuing 50 million cards by the end of 2022, only 29 million were issued by the end of January 2023. The government of the Philippines then set new targets and new deadlines and continues the process today. Mr. Speaker, I share this information to give some context to the performance of the Barbados National ID project up to this point. As of January 26, 2024, 243,320 people have registered for the new Barbados ID card. The 2021 Population and Housing Census estimates the resident population of Barbados at 269,090. 243,320 people compared to a resident population of 269,090 have registered for the Barbados ID card. So even adjusting for non-resident citizens who have registered, that would still put us at least 88% new registration. But sir, I go further. One of our populations of greatest concern has been that of pensioners or the elderly, who use their ID card for transportation, for medicines and financial and other transactions. On this basis, paying particular attention to the population over the age of 51, I can report to this chamber that 108,338 people of that over 51 population have registered for the new card. Correcting, sir, for the likely count of 50-year-olds, the non-resident citizens and other standard error, that still gives us at least a 98.2% uptake of the card among Barbadians 50 years old and over. It has been my judgment, Mr. Speaker, supported by the Cabinet of Barbados, that this overwhelming uptake of the digital ID by Barbadians means that this government need not act as an irritant to even a handful of Barbadians by insisting on mandatory adoption of the digital ID card, nor run the risk of disenfranchising those most in need of government services. In other words, the institutions of the state, such as the Transport Board, the Barbados Drug Service, and others that provide critical goods and services, will not deny those goods and services to the very few numbers of Barbadians who may, as of February 1st, 2024, or at any time in the future, present with the old ID card. Furthermore, we have had discussions with the Central Bank of Barbados, which has agreed with us to take a similar approach in dialogue with the financial institutions which they supervise. To be clear, sir, the deadline has not been extended. The deadline has now been removed. As of February 1st, 2024, the Electoral and Boundaries Commission returns to its normal operations and regular registration process. People may come at their convenience to collect printed cards, to register, or carry out any other business with the EBC. The removal of the deadline also necessarily rescinds any conditions related to the need for a new ID in order to obtain a driver's license or access any other goods and services referenced at Section 5 under obligation to register. Mr. Speaker, I consider that this is a step taken based on mutual trust between this government and the people of Barbados. And what do I mean by that? These numbers of people registered for the new ID card, which I have just shared with you, demonstrate that through the very healthy debate and questions people have had, and fairly so, about the adoption of the new card, Barbadians have shown not just confidence in the capacity of the government to deliver, but an enthusiasm for the ways in which the card will make all our lives easier. Similarly, confident that we are going hand in hand together towards this modernized system, the government sees no need to be inflexible or needlessly punitive with the very few who, for whatever reason, may today remain without the card. We equally are trusting that the 243,000 who will now be in possession of both cards will treat the old one purely as a memento, retire it from their wallets, save it in a time capsule for grandchildren. You no longer require it. Sir, once again, Barbadians have demonstrated maturity, solidarity, and a desire to step boldly into the future they want. Other countries with mandatory registration cannot report this degree of success, sir, so I do not believe that this has been wholly about the deadline and its enforcement. I believe instead that this is about an interest among Barbadians in taking advantage of new opportunities in technology. I do expect, however, that Barbadians will increasingly find it more inconvenient to do business the longer they retain the old ID card. While it will still allow access to basic services, as more conveniences are increasingly afforded via the digital ID card, like not being required to present multiple forms of ID or separate proof of address to your bank, the old ID will simply and quite naturally lose any value to those who hold it. And when it begins to fade or peel and is not accepted, as you and I know, Mr. Speaker, has been the case for years, because of illegibility brought on from wear and tear, the replacement ID will be a new one. Mr. Speaker, true democratic partnership between the state and citizens means that people's trust is earned based on demonstration and based on evidence. A card that brings real value and is administered within a secure framework need not be mandatory. And why? Because, quite simply, people recognize value. And when government is able to deliver on a suite of secure and convenient services available through the digital ID, as we will, I am confident that people will quite naturally continue to register and receive their digital ID cards. This partnership also means a commitment among us all to honest, level-headed communication in all quarters. Sir, there is nothing to be gained by this government or anyone else in knowingly exposing our population and our systems to risk. We commit to exploring and addressing all matters of risk, security, and privacy based on evidence and based on global standards, and continue to invite qualified partners locally and internationally to share with us constructively their guidance and experience so all Barbadians may benefit. Mr. Speaker, not all things that are relevant to this discussion can be said in this single statement. But soon, we will share some proposals for how we might best strengthen those partnerships and the mechanisms for hearing from each other, sir, and developing policy and action together. Mr. Speaker, a change to the legislation will be required to give effect to this intent. However, it has further been our judgment, mine and that of the Honourable Attorney General with the support of the Cabinet, that we will take the time and care necessary to properly review the Barbados Identity Management Act 2021 in order to make these amendments, as well as to clarify other matters that may have been perceived as requiring clarity, such as the fact that there is no cost associated with first issuance of the digital ID card. Any first ID card, both minor and adult, and whenever issued, is free of cost. Amendments will be made to the Act to this effect, where this had always been the intent, but where the language may have given rise to some ambiguity. Mr. Speaker, without prejudice to the discussion and eventual decision of the Cabinet, I can, through you, take this chamber and the people of Barbados into my confidence by advising that we will also revisit aspects of the legislation that relate to the period of validity of the card, fines associated with failure to advise of a change of address, and any and all other matters that we may wish to newly consider. So permit me then, sir, to turn briefly to the next steps. First, to say something about the online application process. And sir, in these matters, I believe that we must speak frankly and clearly. The online registration portal was launched in August 2022 and taken offline in February 2023 because it did not work well. Less than a third of the 17,000 attempted online registrations imported successfully into the EBC's card production system, in particular because of readability of photos and signatures. Those whose registrations failed online were invited via email to the Electoral and Boundaries Commission to complete their registration and were issued Trident EID cards. The online registration process will not be reintroduced until these issues are fixed and tested. Sir, apart from the elderly, another population of concern is people living with disabilities. EBC has had a dedicated system for receiving information from those individuals and deploying registering officers to find and register them in place. That will continue, and we will be more systematic about sharing contact information for those who may wish to have this service and may have been finding some difficulty in doing so. EBC will now move to the stage of validating the addresses of those who have re-registered. Mr. Speaker, I wish to make clear here that this is a standard electoral function and practice with respect to the register of voters. Address verification is done on a rolling basis and has for decades been used to maintain the integrity of the voting system by address and by constituency. The process itself is not unique to the new ID, though on this occasion, all new registrants, not just electors, will have our addresses verified. Why? Sir, this is required if the information on addresses must stand as a true representation of proof of address, as it must for financial institutions, utilities, and others. The only way to remove the burden of having to provide multiple forms of ID and constant proof of address is to have a single address verified once and for all. And that is the next stage in this process that the EBC will undertake. So now to the meat of the real functionality of the card. This is provided via 3 forms of the digital ID. The physical card, which employs PIN and chip technology. And the next phase is to allow the information protected by the PIN to be accessed by institutions, businesses, and card holders themselves, and to allow access to the chip by developing an e-card integration framework. Second, the Trident Online ID and digital signatures. And third, the Trident Mobile ID, which provides a virtual representation of the eID card on a mobile device so that the physical card need not be presented, and it also allows for remote identification served from the comfort of your home. A person can prove who they are without having to be there in person. So this technology is now being developed and in some cases requires alignment with existing legislation such as the Electronic Transactions Act. Mr. Speaker, this is in many ways the beginning of a journey. We will soon share an action plan, engage in regular conversation with Barbadians relative to each stage of this rollout, the various benefits and other considerations, and we will make sure that we benefit from hearing the concerns and the input of all. Sir, I thank my colleagues who came before me and worked toward this major national transition. The honourable members for St. Philip West and St. Michael North, who, like those who must have led this work in the Philippines, in France, in South Africa, in Belgium, in Australia, in New Zealand, refused to be defeated by the necessary delays and frustrations of an entirely new process and by the sheer magnitude of the undertaking, and who believed, like I do, in the value of experimentation and even, yes, in the positive attributes of early failure and quick correction, provided that no Barbadian is, as a result, disadvantaged or disenfranchised. The Chief Electoral Officer, the EBC's project lead, Mr. Kenroy Roach, Ms. Elsa Webster, and the team from MIST, have similarly proven to be quite elastic in their capacity to rebound in the face of new challenges, but firm in their commitment to see the project through. They have the gratitude of the Cabinet and the country for a job well done. So the thing about innovation and new tech is that things break. Applications will have a beta testing phase whose purpose is to find the bugs and fix them. But to find them, someone has to experience them. In this phase, a small group of people will usually use that technology with an expectation that it will fail. For many, that idea is incompatible with what we traditionally see as the role of government, the role of the state. We expect government to get it right the first time, and for issues of health, security, and critical services, we must. We must not take unnecessary risks that cause harm. But for other things, sir, we will need to have a beta testing mindset. This ministry may from time to time call on Barbadians to volunteer to join us in our experimentation. I hope some will be among the willing to fail first and early so that we all succeed. Mr. Speaker, as I close, this Trident ID is a tremendous opportunity, not just to remove nuisance and bureaucracy from the lives of Barbadians, but to start a new, honest conversation about the risks and benefits of new tech. In the last 3 weeks, I have felt the energy and enthusiasm of those within and outside MIST, within and outside government in the private and third sectors, and within and outside Barbados, of those who want this country and its people to win. In the coming weeks and months, you will see us in a process of finding and deploying the talent that exists all over this country, this region, and this world, and of training in new skills for those who want to push themselves further. But equally, you will see us in a conversation where, as a country, we decide together the future that we want, what it looks like, and how we get there. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
Congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42.5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 7, in the name of the Honourable Minister of Industry, Innovation, Science and Technology, to move the second reading of the Cybercrime Bill 2024.
Honourable Member for Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, orders number 7 and 8 dealing with cybercrime and mutual assistance in criminal matters are so inextricably linked that I am seeking the House's permission to have them treated as a cognate debate.
The question is that the two aforementioned bills be treated as a cognate debate. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned bills will be treated as a cognate debate.
Sir.
Continue, honourable member.
Thank you, sir. Sir, permit me to begin this debate today by stepping back for a moment from this particular cybercrime bill and the consequential amendments that are necessitated under the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act as it currently exists. Permit me to step back for a moment to have a conversation through you with all of Barbados about broader issues of cybersecurity and how we protect ourselves collectively from the very real and potentially debilitating threat of attacks on our data, attacks on or online activity, attacks on government, on businesses, and even the very equipment and systems that hold up our social and economic lives. So globally, we are, like everyone else, dealing with global issues of geopolitical instability, fast developing and emerging technology that we first need to understand, to adopt, if we so choose, and in ways that suit us. And then once we feel like we understand, we agree that they serve us in some way, that we wish to adopt them for the purposes that suit us, then to make those technologies secure for our use, and the data that they generate or they gather secure for our use. So we are similarly facing a skills shortage in this sector, and which I will come to in the course of this debate. And we are also facing rising shareholder demands, if you're a business, for security, and also rising regulatory demands that come rightly from the population and from businesses themselves. So in 2015, cybercrime damages were estimated to cost businesses and organizations $3 trillion in damage annually. That figure has now been increased to $10.5 trillion annually by 2025. So by 2025, it is estimated that cyber attacks and related incidents will cost us all $10.5 trillion annually. It is further estimated that 30% of the world's top 560 websites are not secure. 30% of the world's, I'm advised by those who track such matters, 30% of the world's top 560 websites that people tend to use, so the most popular, are not secure. So web applications like calculators, sir, I am one of those people who likes to track calories and macronutrients and these kinds of things. I believe you all remember for St. Michael West and St. Michael South do similar things in their fitness pursuits. So online calculators, Google Documents, email platforms, these things are all vulnerable to a variety of attack methods. So what kinds of things are these? We have things like SQL injections, and sir, you may notice that I'm taking well to the crash course that the others are engaging me in. So you have things like SQL injections where a hacker may use malicious code to get access to backend data that was not intended to be displayed. So things like login boxes, the information that you enter when you log in, search fields, sign up or registration fields, you enter that yourself. That is not meant to be publicly displayed, that is meant to go to a secure location, but there's certain injections of code that mean that somebody intercepts that information, and they're able to use it for their purposes. So they're similarly things like form jacking. So people put, again, malicious code into a web page, something like a payment page, where you might enter credit card data, and they access your financial information in that way. Sir, I will say here that I went online to make a payment recently through a particular telecoms company, and lo and behold, the landing page, the payment page, had changed. It was a different URL, so it's a different address that you see in the bar. The address did not even bear the name of that telecom company. It was a whole different scene. And I stopped. I called somebody from the company, and I said, please confirm for me that you have changed your payment portal. Here is a photo of what it looks like on my computer. Can you please confirm that that is what the payment portal is supposed to look like? Because here it is, You've gone and changed the portal, everything we experience, the URL and everything that we see, and the people of Barbados, your customers, are simply supposed to believe that. I would caution any Barbadian, and I made a suggestion to the company, can you please put out a release that says our payment portal has changed, and this is what it now looks like. Sir, as I will come to later in my remarks, there are several places of intervention. There are several areas that are required to keep us safe in an online environment. State legislation, the matters that I will discuss in the cybercrime bill, or with respect to the cybercrime bill today, and other legislation that we have passed and will pass, that's just one part of it. A very key part of it is education by the private sector, of the private sector, by government, of citizens, to allow people to understand what is the kind of activity that will put you at risk, and what are some of the safeguards that we must all take. And, sir, this cybercrime bill goes particularly to the heart of that matter, because I believe that information now is like air around us. And we get so used to receiving it and disseminating it, we often do not give a thought to how it affects us and how it affects other people. And in some cases, we give a thought, and we know that it will be damaging, and we proceed anyway. But, sir, it is not just the legislation that we put in place. That is an important part of the cybersecurity framework. It is also some of the systems and the online tools that we procure and put in place across government and business. But it is also to make sure that users take the necessary precautions, because no amount of legislation is going to stop highly motivated individuals from trying to get access to your information. And so, yes, the legislation is important to send the right signals and to take the right steps, but I think that over the course of the coming months and years, we will equally be in a conversation through government and through the private sector to talk with consumers about the kinds of activities that are risky and how we can all protect ourselves. Sir, in addition to the kinds of hacking that I've just described, there are also what the experts will call brute force attacks. So really, all a hacker does is enter different permutations of possible passwords or codes until they find the right one. They just run some kind of program that will give them different permutations. They start entering passwords, entering passcodes, just different combinations. They don't have anything else to do. They do that all day and night. And they will run it until they hit the jackpot. And they find the passcode that will gain them access to this particular database or to your information. So in 2018, 48% of malicious email attachments were Microsoft Office files. I'm talking about, you know, the things that say .doc, .x, .dot, things that look normal. And someone sends an attachment. It's a Microsoft Office document. And we open it. 48% of malicious email attachments were Microsoft Office files in 2018. And so this is the environment in which we, against the background of all of the digital changes that are happening, this is the environment in which we must protect ourselves, in which the state must offer protection, in which the private sector, importantly, must offer protection, and is, as we speak, seeking the skills and the infrastructure needed so to do, this is the environment that we're dealing with. So in Barbados in 2022, the rate of internet penetration, internet connectivity, was 82%. In Barbados, a couple years ago, the rate of internet penetration was 82%. And that's one of the reasons that we can't sit back and decide that we will languish in this analog generation forever, because Barbadians expect to be able to use their internet access to expand their choices and live their lives well. Sir, at that time, there were over 235,000 internet users and 328,000 mobile connections. What does that say to you? That we are over 100% when it comes to mobile connection. People have more than one connection, people have more than one device, people are resolute in their need and in their interest in being connected to the global reality. And this is in a country with a population of 267,000. More and more Barbadians are choosing to live their lives online, socially, economically, and in every other way. And both government and the private sector must show up to give effect to those trends and those desires. I want to make it clear, sir, that the direction in which we are moving as a government, I dare say, is not dragging the population kicking and screaming. It is clear to us that people want to be facilitated in living their lives in a paperless environment, being able to have access to services without having to go and stand in lines. This is what people are asking for. Sir, and this approach simply makes people's lives easier. This approach holds tremendous potential for more people to work, to earn higher levels of income, and decrease the cost of doing business now and in the long run. So, sir, what have we been working on? What have we achieved, and where do we have to go with respect to this digital environment? So we've digitalized part of the immigration and border control process, including the welcome stamp application. Digitalized the application process for the police certificate of character and liquor license. And why those things? Why did we begin there? Because, sir, those things, we found, go to the heart of access to employment in the case of the police certificate of character, and in the case of the liquor license, goes to the heart of commerce in our culture and in our country. The BIMSafe and the SHAPE apps developed by Barbadians helped keep us safe during COVID. And so I believe they must be revisited for their potential in other aspects of healthcare management, or even in different applications and for different uses. We've expanded the services available on government's Easy Pay Plus e-payment platform, undertaken the Smart Bridgetown project for free, full Wi-Fi coverage in the city. The Planning and Development Department, what we used to know as Town and Country Planning, now has an e-planning solution where applications are submitted and paid for online, and internally are considered as well in an online environment. In a situation where formerly things had to be sent back via courier. I have a file, and sir, the member for Christchurch West knows well, that some of these files, some of the documentation associated with planning applications, they're huge. They're plans, they're multiple documents, EIAs that are sometimes 200 pages long. Before, you would have to pick that up and carry that somewhere. And now through the e-planning, I believe they're in a second version to improve even the services that were originally offered. That is no longer necessary. And then we have the digital ID. But we have so much further to go. To full operationalization of e-government, with core services available online, to digital health and education access and products, to global monetization mechanisms for local online businesses with respect to products, services, and intellectual property. What do I mean by that? We have a bit of a gap in opportunity when it comes to how young Barbadians especially are able to monetize their products, services, and creations in an online environment. So we know that there's quite a bit of money to be made among people who, by virtue of their influence in a particular population, then attract advertising interests, are paid for those ads, and are able to generate income in that environment. And there's much more, much further to go in availing our young, and sometimes not so young people, of the opportunity to be a part of that global marketplace. And currently there are still some global financial and other challenges that prevent that. But we must be able to go further and to make those opportunities available to all. So for all of this, and importantly for the cybersecurity framework that must envelop all of this, we need to continue to invest in and scale up the cybersecurity and other tech training that we have already started. So we are right now underskilled in this area, and I know that that comment is going to spark a lot of representation that this number of people have graduated from UE with this particular certification and so on. That's not what I mean. We are right now underskilled in this area, in part because these fields are extremely dynamic. And we want to not just train young learners and transitioning professionals, but we want to have them work in diverse environments here and abroad, so that the risk environments that they experience and therefore respond to cover a universe of technologies and scenarios. So if you work in Barbados, and remember for Christchurch, East Central, and I have this conversation all the time. Barbados has benefited from extremely sound economic governance for most of our lives, with a bit of a chasm in between, and then now again since 2018. And we are grateful for that. We are grateful for that. But if you're an economist, excited to roll up your sleeves and do some work, well, I dare say Barbados is not the most challenging environment in which to do that. And why? The universe of problems that we have is very, very small. Some months ago, the member and I met at the time he was new, IMF representative for the area. He will more properly know how to call it at this time. These things have evaporated a little bit from my memory. But he is from Argentina. And as we were talking to him, there was a bit of jealousy in the conversation, because if you've worked as an economist in Argentina, then you have seen some things. I draw that parallel, sir, to say that when it comes to cybersecurity and other tech experience, those people who are coming through our systems, and they are talented. We, EBC, engaged the help of students from the Barbados Community College when the online transaction portal was giving some difficulty. And they stepped right up and they showed that they are able to operate in this space. But we want people to leave, work in multiple environments, understand what different types of risks look like, and then once they return, we have the benefit of that varied experience. So, sir, to be clear, our national cybersecurity strategy highlights several areas of simultaneous action that are required. And appropriate legislation is only one area of this action, and I will come to some of the others during the course of my remarks. So, sir, in the area of legislation, we know that the Electronic Transactions Act will likely need to be amended to facilitate some of what is contemplated as part of the digital ID and other parts of the national digital strategy. And so these are efforts that we will have to revisit and undertake. And the National Cybersecurity Strategy, which I encourage Barbadians to have a look at, lays out some of what is required. Sir, I do want to say about that strategy that it is exactly, to my mind, what a strategy should be. It plainly lays out what the gaps are, it indicates what is being done, and it, at the high level, says what must happen in order to get us where we need to go. And that is really to give us a snapshot of what needs to be done. But we need to work through and work plan all of these items in order to come with something that we can execute. So we have the Electronic Transactions Act that exists, but that will likely require some revisiting. In 2019, we passed the Data Protection Act, and we've also appointed a Data Protection Commissioner. Sir, I believe that perhaps some of what is contained in that act and some of what it affords Barbadians in the way of protection is not clearly understood. And I am one of those people who believes that if somebody doesn't understand me, it means that I did not communicate well. So I'm not saying that it is the public's deficiency not to understand, but I'm saying that it is worthwhile to be able to keep talking about that, because I think sometimes some of the consternation and the anguish and the anxiety comes from the notion that people's information is not protected when we clearly have a piece of legislation that speaks to how that protection functions and that empowers a data commissioner, a regulator. The Office of the Data Protection Commissioner is a regulatory function to be able to do that work. Now, we've just come through estimates, and I feel very strongly that an Office of a Data Protection Commissioner requires more than one commissioner and two administrative people in order to function. If you consult the Data Protection Act and you look at the range of functions for which she is responsible, you'll understand that the office needs to be resourced, and I consider that I'm standing in the right position in this chamber, next to the member for Christchurch East Central, to impress on anyone who may need to know that these are resources that are required in order to give effect to what we are trying to do here. So, sir, the Electronic Transactions Act, the Data Protection Act, and the appointment of a Data Protection Commissioner, and then there is a Computer Misuse Act. And that act, sir, is our point of departure today. The Computer Misuse Act, Cap 124B, came into force on the 18th of July, 2005. And that act sought to make provisions for the protection of computer systems and the information contained in those systems from unauthorized access, to protect them from abuse by persons authorized to have access, and related matters. Now, sir, we have also taken the step of establishing a law reform commission. And the importance of that commission not just in this work, but in all areas of legislative function and the process of determining necessary regulation, determining whether the legislation that currently exists suits our purposes today and going forward, I don't think we can understate the importance of that Law Reform Commission, and I thank them here now for their tremendous work. I will return at the end of my presentation to thank them again because, you know, to be able to assess the lay of the land, to say what does not work, to be able to source the right support to make these legislative changes, this is no small thing. And so the Computer Misuse Act came to the attention of the Law Reform Commission, and I would say for a number of reasons. And I want us to have a common understanding of the domestic reality, but also of the regional and international reality. Sir, we have all heard of the various cyber attacks of government agencies and of businesses. I don't need to revisit those in this chamber today. But there is understandable fear when financial institutions, when government institutions responsible for data, when these are the subject of orchestrated attacks. Now, it is one thing to, and it's bad enough, to have a situation where information is made insecure because it is left somewhere or because it is inadvertently sent somewhere. It sparks a different level of trepidation, a feeling of being targeted when you are the subject of a legitimate targeted cyber attack. And we have had, in recent years, some examples of this. And there is a need to respond. But there is something else that necessitates this conversation here today. And that is what one might consider the indiscriminate use of personal information for the purposes of taking advantage of an individual or for the purposes of harassing or bullying an individual, or for the purpose of having some financial or other benefit from a person's private information. Sir, I feel as if we have regrettably come to a point where there is scant respect for information. And I say we, meaning all of us. Because I get something on my phone does not mean that it passes the test of that which should be transferred, or that which should be shared with a third party, or that which should be the subject of wide discussion. I fear that because information is so accessible, we almost feel like hitting send absolves us of any responsibility. Well, I didn't write it, I didn't create it. It's almost like when you go in a store and buy something and it malfunctions and you take it back and the person says, well, I didn't make it. You have a responsibility for your role in that chain that has caused me to be affected by the transmission of that information. Sir, the Computer Misuse Act started to go some ways to address these issues that affect us locally. But to the extent that addressing cybercrime calls for legislative response to the newest in technology and technological approaches, to the extent that it must allow for international cooperation in matters where physical borders don't exist, they don't matter. Based on this, it's been adjudged by the Law Reform Commission that the Computer Misuse Act is woefully inadequate for 2024 and beyond. And so it is on this basis that the Commission accepted the offer of assistance from the Convention of Cybercrime of the Council of Europe, known as the Budapest Convention, which is the only binding international instrument relating to cybercrime, and which serves her as a guideline for any country that is developing comprehensive national legislation against cybercrime as a framework for international cooperation between state parties to this treaty. In other words, sir, these matters don't just require action at the domestic level, and they don't just affect us. In fact, in many cases, they do not originate domestically. They originate in many parts of the world and require the capacity to investigate, to operate jurisdictionally in other places. And so the Law Reform Commission thought then that it would be an appropriate time, given the offer of support, to compare the existing act with the requirements necessary to meet this convention. Now, I want to make it clear that the process was as follows. We determined locally that we were dealing with some challenges with respect to cybersecurity and cybercrime that we needed to address. The Budapest Convention is the global standard for how countries address this, not just because someone has said so, but because it actually provides a framework for how, as countries, we cooperate to bring effect to these issues. So the Council volunteered assistance to the Commission to look at what were the deficiencies in the Act and to facilitate the drafting of a piece of legislation that was more contemporary, more modern, and would suit our purposes better. And so we had virtual workshops with representatives of the Commission, 2 draftspeople from the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel were involved, and that was back in 2021. The Act was reviewed, a draft bill was prepared, and then we had a final meeting with the representatives at the end of 2021. And then further work last year in 2023, September, when the Council of Europe sponsored 3 workshops for judicial officers, police officers, prosecutors, service providers. The proposed bills, and sorry, take the time to go through these details, because it is important to make clear that in this matter, as in all matters, we took the time to speak to experts globally, regionally, and locally. We took the time to consult with people who will have to enforce. We took the time to consult with people who will themselves be monitoring systems for cyber attacks. We took the time to consult with people in the private sector who offer such services internationally as well, and who were able to give their perspectives on what was being proposed. And so subsequent to the workshop, once these matters had been reviewed, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's Department made some minor adjustments, and we find ourselves here today with the bill that is being proposed. So, sir, the Cybercrime Bill 2024 provides for the combating of cybercrime, the protection of legitimate interests in the use and development of information technologies, and I pause on that particular provision because I want to emphasize, and I will later in my presentation, that this cybercrime bill is meant to create offenses in cases where there is true criminal activity that is intended and taking place, but it is also designed to protect legitimate interests and development. It is not designed, and it is particular in its framing, not to criminalize or penalize those experts, those professionals, those service providers who are in the business of surveillance, of ethical hacking, by which I mean they try to break a system to see whether it will break. The bill, not in its intent, nor in its design, nor in its presentation, the bill does not penalize those groups of people. So combat cybercrime, protect legitimate interests in the use and development of information technologies, facilitation of international cooperation in computer-related crimes and related matters, and it would therefore repeal the Computer Misuse Act, Cap 124B. So, sir, just to quickly address what the bill is aiming to do in its clauses, and to summarize. Part 2 of the bill looks at prohibited conduct, and I will go into some of these more fully, but really just to summarize. What is the prohibited conduct under the bill? It speaks to issues of illegal access to information, to systems, modifying or interfering with program or data. This is prohibited conduct. Interfering with computer system, and I will go into details of the conditions under which those are considered unlawful or prohibited. Illegally intercepting data that you are unauthorized to intercept. The misuse of devices. Access with intent to commit a further criminal offense. Disclosure of access codes. The question of the treatment of critical information infrastructure systems is also addressed under the bill. The conditions under which one receives or gives access to computer programs or to data. The bill also outlines the prohibited conduct with respect to computer-related forgery, computer-related fraud, child pornography, child grooming, online sexual abuse of children, malicious communication, cyberbullying, cyberterrorism, and the question of aiding and abetting these acts. Part 3 looks at investigation and enforcement. So what is involved in search and seizure of data and systems and programs, the conditions under which a police officer may be assisted in her or his duties, the record of seized data and the conditions under which it is provided to the owner, the production of data for criminal proceedings, and expedited preservation and partial disclosure of traffic data. Part 3 further looks at the preservation of data for criminal proceedings, looks at how orders are made for the payment of compensation, and then goes into any necessary regulations and consequential amendments, and so on. So, sir, I will not seek to be exhaustive in going through the clauses, because I think much of what the bill outlines is well explained in its presentation. And so I endeavor, sir, to have a bit of a conversation through you on some specific explanations. And sir, I really beg the indulgence of the chamber because I also have to go further. I believe that when citizens, anyone makes representation to the government in terms of concerns that they have with respect to a particular area like cybersecurity, that we have a responsibility to answer. And so, in the course of my discussion, sir, I also propose to answer some of the concerns that have been raised. Sir, this is part of the conversation, the conversational approach that I'm hoping to encourage as we go forward. Sir, I will also say before I proceed that we are discussing at the same time the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Amendment Bill because when that act was first contemplated, first passed and proclaimed, one could not have known that we would have such complex matters of computer misuse to confront. And so the consequential amendments that are outlined herein are really as a result of having to bring effect to the cybercrime bill and really adding information and making provision for that same mutual assistance that countries would have, those partnerships that countries would engage in, to extend that beyond the kinds of crimes that we are traditionally aware of and exposed to, and expand that to the cybercrime that is covered in the bill. So, sir, this bill makes it an offense to intentionally or recklessly and without authority gain access to the whole or any part of a computer system, cause a program to be executed or use the program to gain access to any data without authority. And it is important to understand that in many frameworks in which we work, in which we carry on our personal lives and our personal commitments and our social expressions, that there's an issue of access. To get into a building, you're given an access card. If you don't have that card, if you don't have a key, if you don't have the means of entrance, if you have not been equipped with the wherewithal to gain access, it means you have to ask for permission. I think that is a general understanding that we have. If you determine that you would rather not ask for permission, and you gain access anyway, then that is without authority. Similarly, if there is a device, a tablet, a computer, a data center, a program, a piece of software, something that you are aware, either by virtue of you not having a password, you not having a key, you know you don't belong in there. So I think that it is the Cybercrime, the Computer Misuse Act had made reference to without lawful excuse or justification, and it was considered that that was quite a broad and undefined term. And so we opted then to stipulate without authority, considering that this was far less defensible and gave far fewer options for people to say, well, I had an excuse or I had a justification, as they might have done under the former act. Sir, The bill also makes it an offense to illegally, at clause 8, to illegally intercept data as it relates to non-public transmission to, from, or within a computer system. So, sir, those practices that I mentioned, where you intercept somebody, a payment portal, you create malicious code so that when somebody is entering their credit card information, it actually comes to you and doesn't go to the intended recipient. Those kinds of offenses are prohibited conduct under the cybercrime bill. It further makes it an offense, sir, to intentionally, recklessly, or without authority produce, sell, procure for use, import, export, distribute, or otherwise make available a device primarily designed or adapted to commit an offense. So a device that has been built, procured, primarily to commit a crime. To procure that, to produce it, to sell it, to import it, to export it is an offense under this legislation. Similarly, it is an offense to produce, sell, procure, etc., a computer password, access code, or similar data. So I may not use the password myself. I may not use the information myself. I may sell lists of credit card information has been done to people so that they can carry out the malicious proceedings that they intend to carry out, sir, with your credit card information. Now, I think it's important to pause and indicate that the former act, the Computer Misuse Act, also criminalized that activity. It didn't criminalize the production and procurement for use of devices or computer passwords. So maybe a decade ago, there was a raging debate about this issue of the data that companies collect about you and how it is permitted to be used. And I remember that I was living abroad at the time when the country where I was living determined that a company couldn't call you if they had gotten your phone number from a source other than your provision of your contact information to that company. And so for example, there was new legislation that gave this opt-in or opt-out provision because they determined that if a company got your information by means other than your express permission, they could not benefit. They could not potentially benefit from using that information to advertise their product or service. So there are far-reaching implications, and there are potentially far-reaching applications, sir, of this kind of approach. Sir, clause 11 makes it an offense intentionally, recklessly, or without authority to disclose access codes. And I think the qualifications here are important. And I'll come to that when I respond to some of the comments that were given by others. So the disclosure of access codes. Clause 14 introduces the offense of computer-related forgery. So then it is an offense to intentionally and without authority input, alter, delete, or suppress a program or data that results in inauthentic data being considered or acted upon for legal purposes as if it were authentic. So, sir, our traditional idea of forgery is that I have a look at the signature of the member for Christchurch East Central, and I practice a little bit with my hand. And if I want to represent his person or his authority in some other environment, then I reproduce that with my hand, and I say, the member for Christchurch East Central signed that. Here it is. But there is forgery possible in an online environment where I interfere with how a system functions, where I interfere with data, where I misrepresent a digital signature or other representation of a person or of a company or of a program. And that is also an offense. Sir, I want to come now to some of the issues that affect Barbadians perhaps in a more fundamental way. And so clauses 16 to 20 address issues of child pornography, child grooming, sexual abuse of children, malicious communication that is meant to harass, and cyberbullying. And I think this is a very important provision. These are very important provisions of this legislation. Sir, the Child Justice Bill and its accompanying legislation, the Child Protection Bill, have for some time been before the select committees for consideration, and I know have benefited from rigorous conversation. In everything that we do, in every environment in which children may be taken advantage of, we have in everything that we do, in every environment in which children